to this, and thank you for being here. I do have a bunch of people who are hopefully going to be watching the review and the video of this. I know both of you are interested in advisory groups, and especially Dave, you have some really unique experiences in the past with various different organizations and your own counseling experience. But I just wanted to share a little bit about my background and how I got to Kingdom Factor, and then introduce you guys to Ray really quick. So I literally grew up in the church parking lot. Like that was my playground and where I learned to ride my bike. And my dad used to take us sledding behind the car in the church parking lot because my dad was pastor. And so I grew up literally in the church. My piano to practice my piano lessons was the one that we used for worship in the morning. But I also grew up in the 1970s and 80s in a Pentecostal family. And so if you know anything about that, you know, I wore a lot of dresses. I wasn't allowed to go to movies. There was a lot of music I couldn't listen to. There was just a lot that I wasn't allowed to do. And a lot of that had to do with my career. And my dad was the first one who sort of taught me that careers had gender in the world. And so I've fought back on that my whole life. So I started out as a school teacher. I lost a couple of students very tragically about 10 years into my career and went, I'm going to take a 1 year break. I just went on an emotional break. 1 year turned into 13 years of progressive movement at Hewlett Packard, working with how people learn. I got to the end of my career there and I knew it was the end, and I failed to jump off the cliff and take the leap of faith to do something different. And so God gave me a little shove called a layoff. And that was in 2013 on my dad's birthday. So I'll never forget the date. But that led to me being part of the oil and gas industry here in Houston. I met a wonderful man who introduced me to Marketplace Ministry. His name was Michael Howe. And he said, you should be a workplace chaplain. And so I pursued a degree in pastoral counseling and chaplaincy. And then when I got to the end of that, I was like, well, all I can do is hang out a shingle. And I don't really think I want to hang out a shingle. And so I took a job at a nonprofit, which is where I met Marvin and where I met Dave at the Construction Career Collaborative here in Houston. And that was a tremendous growth experience for me as I was leading that organization and finding out more and more about myself and the things that I really love and the things I really don't love. And once again, I knew I was at the end of my tenure there, but I didn't take the leap of faith. I was trying to get to the end of this year and then kind of take my leap of faith. And so they said, here, we're going to hand you a severance package, go forth and do. And so God has this way of like freeing me up to go and pursue the things that he knows I need to do. I ran into Kingdom Factor almost immediately after getting laid off in May. And my husband and I prayed about it extensively and really felt like this was the culmination of everything God's given me. And so, my counseling background, my experience in nonprofit, my experience in for-profit, all of it just kind of coming together as a perfect storm to allow me to put together these peer advisory groups that are faith-driven, right? Not anything else, but faith-driven. And so I'm super excited to let Ray talk to you about like the inception of this organization and how it came to be, and share some of his background. And so here we go. Ray, I'm going to turn it over to you, the master of peer advisory groups.
Well, you introduced me just probably as my mother would. Thank you. That was very kind of you. Good morning, everybody. So as Angela shared, my name is Ray Hilbert. I don't like to usually start conversations with an apology, but I'm sitting in a Panera Bread. I live in the Indianapolis, Indiana area, and we've got a bunch of snow and ice. And I had an early morning meeting, got out on the interstate, and there was this huge car pile up. And so I wasn't able to get back to my office to get on this call. So please forgive me, but I am sitting in a restaurant. I do hope you can hear and see me okay. I do have headphones. Am I coming across okay? I just, with technology, just never know. So I do apologize for that, but I did not want to miss this opportunity to be with you all. So my background, my degree in college was in business marketing specifically, went on to get an MBA, spent a number of years in corporate world, Went on to start some of my own businesses and so forth. I'll get back to that in just a moment. But one of the things I learned in marketing and business was the importance of having a good tagline. And there's a tagline on your screen now that, in its purest form, is awful because it's long, way too long. However, I'm going to take probably about 40 minutes or so to really dive in deep to Kingdom Factor and what we do and everything. But if I only had about 30 seconds to do it, it's what's on the screen right now. So I kind of like to start there and then I'll go from there. But what we're about here at Kingdom Factor is about bringing together real Christian business leaders where we have real conversations about our real issues and we create real solutions and produce real results. Like I said, I know that's kind of long for a tagline, if you will, but one of the things that you'll notice, of course, the word real shows up several times there. And in today's world of social media, artificial intelligence, all these things that are out there, it's becoming increasingly difficult to navigate and to discern and understand what's real and authentic and genuine versus generated and artificial, right? And produced. Well, we bring together real Christian business leaders, real people like all of us on this conversation right now. And we have these real conversations and real things happen, real results. And so, what I hope to do over the next few moments is just to share a little bit of history, a little bit of background, and hopefully, at some level of detail, to communicate what we're all about at Kingdom Factor and give you a chance to explore that and learn about that. And I'm so honored, Angela, and so excited you're part of the team and your background, just you're obviously, your journey growing up as a PK, and in the church and your business background, your educational background, your career. Um, I'm reminded of that verse in the scriptures that says, "Who would say that you were brought to the kingdom but for a time such as this?" Right? And so it does sound like it feels like a great culmination. And I just want to honor you and say thank you. And just we're so excited you're part of our team, and I just can't wait to see how God forms this journey together. So awesome, awesome. So thank
Thank
you.
you.
Of course, you bet. So we call this an informational briefing, and that's what it is. Uh, we are doing this live right now, but we are recording this. So you might be someone who's seeing this at a later time via video, and that's just fantastic. But what I'm going to cover in this is a little bit of background of who and what is Kingdom Factor. I'll share about the value and the ROI of being in what we call our peer group model, and I'll share what happens in the model and so forth. And I'll explain in just a moment the next steps. But let me tell you what's not going to happen today. What's not going to happen today is some kind of hard sales pitch, some kind of thing where at the end we're going to say, hey, do this today. There's a special offer, discounts, none of the hype, none of that. We're just going to share information today. This is not a time to make any kind of commitments or decisions. It's just an opportunity for you to learn firsthand what God is doing in and through this work. And so I would just, humbly ask, just have an open heart and open mind, because don't worry, there's no big hook coming at the end. There's no strong close or anything like that. If that sounds fair, everybody just give me a thumbs up, because I just want to make sure we're kind of on the same page and what we're expecting here. Thank you so much. What we will do at the end is the last slide that I'll put up. It'll have a QR code on it. And I would request if you would, have your phone handy and just capture that QR code, because we would be so thankful if you would just take, it's about I don't know, 30, 45-second survey that gives us some feedback. Was this information helpful to you? Did you find it interesting? And if you are interested in a next level conversation, we'll follow up and schedule that with you. So that's what that survey will help us to understand. So that's as far as we're going to go today. If you are interested in learning more, there's going to be lots of questions that we will not, we don't get all the details today. That's what the follow up would be. So that's kind of where we're heading towards this. So why the name Kingdom Factor? Years ago, when we put this together, we were praying and we were asking the Lord to give us some insights on what should we call this thing. And one of the things that we kind of came to is understanding that all of us, as sons and daughters of the King Most High, we're all building a kingdom of some sort. We all are building a kingdom. The question is, whose kingdom are we building, right? Are we building our own? Are we building God's kingdom? So that was kind of an important question for us to ponder and think through. And the second word in our company name is factor. And it was interesting because when I started studying this word factor, one of the definitions of the word factor is one who acts or serves on behalf of another. Well, if we study the scripture, that sounds a lot like a steward. So, as Christians in business, as Christians in leadership and in the marketplace, we have been entrusted with resources and assets and intellectual property and relationships and influence and all these things. So, when we put this all together, what we're about at Kingdom Factor is as Christian business leaders, how can we steward what God has entrusted to us to build his kingdom in and through the marketplace? That's in essence what we're about at the high level. Just a little bit of backdrop of how this all began. So I've had the amazing blessing of doing what you're learning about today full time and only this since 1998. So going on close to 30 years now. And it's just been an amazing journey. And what we've seen is God moved mightily. And today we have hundreds of companies and leaders involved. We do train up coaches. We started doing that about 4 years ago, kind of expanding our model. And just a little bit of my own background that kind of led to this. As I mentioned earlier, I had a business degree, worked in corporate America for a while, but then in my mid to late 20s, I started a business that it's a clothing and apparel line and did pretty well. And then I was invited by a friend of mine to become a partner with him in another business. And that business, the second business, in about 15 months' time, imploded horrifically. And we lost. I mean, it just, I can't even describe it. It just exploded in a bad way. It just imploded. It was really terrible. We lost pretty much everything financially. Our marriage survived it, and we didn't lose our home, but we got wiped out in every other way imaginable. And it was such a learning season for me. I learned a lot of lessons. I remember creditors calling, wanting to know how and when they were going to get paid. I don't know if anybody's ever been there. I remember handing the pay. This is back in the day when we had real paper paychecks, and I would hand those employees those paychecks, and I would say, "Hey, would you hold off trying to cash this for a couple of days? We got to pray for some cash to come in." I learned a lot of lessons in that season of my life. One of the lessons that I learned was that while I had great Christian community around me, I was in men's study, Bible studies, accountability groups. My wife and I were in Bible studies together and so forth. I had great Christian community around me, but what I didn't have was good Christian business community around me, people that understood and could help me navigate dealing with creditors and vendors and all these things that I didn't know how to deal with because I hadn't been there before. So that was a lesson that I learned, was the importance of having good Christian business community around me. Another thing that I learned in that season of my life was that my vendors, my bankers, my creditors, my employees, those that were in my business ecosystem, seemed to be much more open to me sharing my Christian testimony when I was current on my payments to them. Right. And so I just remember how important and critical effective witness is connected to being credible in what we're doing in the marketplace and in the world. And so those were just some of the things that happened. And so what I ended up doing was I pulled together, it was a lonely season. I don't know if anybody can relate to that or not, but it was a lonely season. So I ended up pulling together a handful of business leaders here in my home community of Indianapolis. And we started meeting once a month for about a half a day. There wasn't a business plan, there wasn't content, none of the things that we have today. We just started meeting and having conversations about life, faith, business, how does it all work? And it became so powerful. Those 9 individuals became 12, became 20. And so now here we are all these years later, still doing it. And it has just been an amazing journey. And just want to give you that backdrop that this was birthed out of real world experiences. And so, as you're learning about this, a couple of things I would ask you to consider is just, kind of be thinking for yourself is what's drawn you to learn about this? Maybe it was just a personal invitation from Angela saying, hey, I'd like you to know what I'm doing. I would consider it a favor if you check this out. And if that's what you're here to learn about, that's great. We are so grateful for that. You may just want to be aware of what Angela's doing so that as you're out living life, maybe somebody comes to mind that might need to know what she's doing. So we are super grateful if you're just learning about this because you want to support Angela and maybe be a referral partner for her. You might be a Christian business owner, an entrepreneur, a nonprofit leader, a leader in the marketplace that's wanting to live out your faith. And it might be that somehow in his plan, God's brought you to learn about this. Maybe he's touching in a way into your heart to just learn more about this. So, whatever has drawn you here, we're super grateful and thankful and just want you to be mindful of that. I do want you to be thinking about in your life and or your business, what's like the biggest problem, challenge, or issue that you would really want to figure out or solve, say in the next 6 months? Because one thing I do want to do in my presentation is share with you how we help, specifically how we help people in our groups solve their biggest issues and bring real value. I'm going to give you some examples and some stories. So be thinking about, gosh, what would it look like to get a real solution to my big issue in the next, say, 6 months? One of the questions that I like to ask, just for people to consider is how familiar are you with this concept of a Christian business peer advisory group? Because anecdotally, and as I've said, I've been doing this for 2.5 decades. I've discovered and learned over the years that about 80% of the people that I get a chance to share this with have never had a formal introduction to this concept. Many have, but many more have not. And so this might be your first time learning formally about this, or you might be very informed on this kind of model, and that's okay, but this might be new and to be open-minded about this. Now, Angela, one of the things, if you could make a note for our friends who are on here, if we could get them a copy, an electronic copy of this document we've got, it's called an executive summary, and it's called the Transformational Power of Christian Business Peer Groups. Now, this is a document, it's not about Kingdom Factor, but what we have done is we've gone out and we've searched and we've found articles and research and third party endorsements of this concept. So if you do get this document, it's not going to say Forbes magazine says this about Kingdom Factor or Harvard Business Review says this about Kingdom Factor. But what the document does do is validate the value of this model. And so we'd love for you to just kind of check that out for yourself so that you can see and learn the credibility of this kind of model. And as I mentioned a moment, this isn't new. We've been at this for a long time. And so it is proven over a period of time. One comment that's in this document, it comes from the Boston Business Journal, that just really says that increased CEO peer networking unlocks higher levels of business performance and innovation. That's what happens in these groups. And McKinsey and Company says that many executives credit this kind of peer group with keeping them on focus and hitting their goals. How many of you have heard of the Harvard Business Review? They came out in April of 2024. They did an article and they said, here's the best practices of these business peer groups that are out there. They just looked at the landscape and they said, look, if you're going to consider joining a peer group, look at these elements, look at these components. How do they recruit members was one of the points they made. And they said, ideally, the best peer group models have between 6 and 12 members in them. Ideally, those members have diverse backgrounds. They have best interest for one another in mind. Ideally, they said, look and see if there's interpersonal dynamics. Does this group do more than just focus on business, for example? Does it talk about personal growth, personal development, and in our case, spiritual growth and development? Well, long before Harvard Business Review came out with this article, this has been our model. And so it's kind of neat to see it validated in that sort of way. So our typical groups will cap out at about 12 members, like-minded Christian business leaders, and usually a group 6 to 12, but we like to cap it at around 12. And our model is deeply rooted in thriving personally, professionally, and spiritually. Jesus's words in the Bible, says, "What gaineth a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul in the process?" And so we're very holistic in this. We're going to grow and thrive in all key areas. The second thing that Harvard Business Review said is check out the group guidelines and structure. Is there a consistent cadence to the model? Do they meet regularly? What does that look like? Is there a clear agenda? Is there clearly defined leadership? Well, in this case, we have that for sure with Angela as the clearly defined leader in this model. There's a consistent cadence. We meet once a month, and there's a very clear agenda, which I'm going to show you in just a few moments. And so we've been meeting this best practice of a peer group for a long, long time. The third thing they said is make sure that the core values of the group are established and followed. Things like confidentiality, candor, empathy, and a balanced approach. Again, this has been our model for well over 20 years. How has the group done at establishing and maintaining momentum over a long period of time? I can speak personally. I today still run 4 groups myself. My average tenured member has been with me more than 8 years. Some of them have been over 20 years. And that's not because I'm anything special. It's just there's great value in this model and it becomes a tight knit community. And so that comes because the people involved share their values, their priorities in life. In this case, what greater alignment than with the kingdom of Christ in alignment as the forefront in this model? Is there accountability? Is there engagement? All of these things are at the heart of the DNA of Kingdom Factor. Now, I'm not going to take the time to read this list, but this came out of Forbes, and they said here's 15 reasons to join a business peer group. And if I had time, or if I took the time, I could give you specific examples and stories and applications of every one of these in the Kingdom Factor model. So it's just nice to know there's a lot of validation out there. We focus on individuals who primarily work in privately held companies or nonprofits. We do have members who are executives in public companies that participate, but we really focus in this area of privately held companies because the majority of jobs in our economy are created in these environments, and 57% of the GDP is found in privately held firms and nonprofits and so forth. And so we just find that we can have a better influence with those, and they usually don't have the resources to have big paid boards and those kinds of things. So this kind of model allows for those smaller firms to be a part of it. And you can see that there's actually ROI attached based on independent research to these kind of models. You can just see some stats there. And as we look at this, I'm going to take just a couple more minutes, then I'm going to get into the specifics. I want you to consider what is the ROI? What's the value of having a group of seasoned, experienced leaders meeting together? In our model, a typical group will have over 200 years of combined business experience and faith journey with Jesus. Now, I don't know. I don't think even everybody on this call knows everybody. That's probably true, right? We probably, as we're looking around the screen, we see some people we don't know. Is that true? True? Okay. Now, watch this though. I'm pretty confident that there's more wisdom and experience and expertise collectively on this conversation than there are in any of our individual seats. You all are a lot smarter collectively than I am individually. That makes sense, right? And so the value happens. What's it worth when you can begin to bring together maybe somebody who's got some experience with some legal background and some HR background and marketing and technology, somebody who's been married for 40 years, somebody who's newly married, there's a lot of value in that kind of collective wisdom. In fact, if we were to hire coaches and consultants with this kind of expertise, it would cost us thousands of dollars to get a few hours, right? I promise you, we're pennies on the dollar compared to that. And so we'll get into all that, at another time. But there's just great value to this kind of model. And I just want to take a moment and share just a couple of examples and stories. Um, the the left, the Cynthia is her name. She says, the last meeting, I got an idea that has the potential to add six figures to our business revenue over the next 12 months. I'm actually going to see her in a group meeting tomorrow. And so this is just a quote from one of our members, Cynthia. Another one, and again, I'm just randomly picking out a couple here, but one I love to share is KM. His name's Kevin Mangan. This story to you folks down in the Houston area probably won't make any sense, but to those of us, I told you there's snow and ice on the floor or on the ground right now. There's a picture on your screen of something. That item's called a snowcaster. And my friend Kevin, who's been in one of my groups now 19 years, a few years ago, he had a commercial snow removal business. And he wanted to bring a product to market for some of the smaller areas like sidewalks, smaller driveways, rather than bringing in the big truck and all that. It wasn't efficient to do that. So he was developing this product called the Snowcaster, which is essentially like a snow blade with a handle on wheels. He did his studies and found that it was going to reduce labor by about 50% in these smaller jobs. So, do you remember a few moments ago when I said, what's the biggest problem or challenge you'd want to solve in the next 6 months? I'm going to now tell you how we helped Kevin solve his problem. He brought his business plan into the group. He hadn't started manufacturing this yet, but he said, here's my business plan. Would you all review it? Would you pick it apart? Would you look for my blind spots? What am I missing? And one individual was like, well, I have a little bit of experience in the injection molding, and I think you're overlooking this, this, and this. Somebody else had some content to offer and some expertise to offer in distribution. And so when the collective input from the room was brought together, Kevin said over time, it generated $300,000 in savings to him. Now, would y'all agree with me? That's a pretty good value. Is that's like a real story, right? Well, what's really cool is there's actually a little bit more to Kevin's story. One of the things that we do in Kingdom Factor is totally voluntary, but we, from time to time, will go do missions work together, sometimes in our own cities, sometimes we'll go to other countries. We'll build houses together. We'll go just in various ministry opportunities. Well, we partner with this ministry down in Mexico, and one of the things that they do is they rescue children out of sex trafficking. So Kevin and his wife Kelly, the group helped them save $300,000. He was going to invest that cash in the launch of this new product. He and his wife were so moved by partnering with this ministry that they were able to take a significant portion of that savings and invest. And they wrote a check, and they were able to rescue 65 children out of the sex trafficking industry. Now, friends, that to me is powerful. That is doing kingdom business, right? Because if we can come together, help one another do business better, do it wiser, do it more efficient, resources get freed up in other ways to impact lives in the kingdom. So I could give you lots of other stories, but that one's a really amazing one, right? And so Kevin was just in his group meeting yesterday. So he's been around for a while. And so he'll tell you he'll never spend $300,000 in dues if he was a member for the rest of his life. So as we've been in this space, I'm not going to cover all these. I'm just going to touch on a couple, two or three of them here. As we've been in this space for 2.5 decades, we see some common traits that many Christian business and marketplace leaders have. One is, by and large, they feel overwhelmed. And I don't know if you can relate to that, but I said this earlier in a conversation today that I didn't wake up this morning in my quiet time and say, Lord, I've got so much free time. Would you please put more on my plate? I doubt any of us prayed that prayer this morning. So we know that we're overwhelmed. The pace of life and business is getting faster and faster. The pressure and demands is getting increasingly difficult. Everybody's carrying these phones, right? And so anything that happens is now getting captured and documented. An interaction with a customer that doesn't go well, that ends up on somebody's social media post. And now all of a sudden, hundreds of thousands hear about it. Or a bad hiring decision, or somebody's unhappy with you as their employer. They go post it on Glassdoor or whatever, right? The pressure and demands are getting so great. And we need to be wiser than ever in our decision making. And over 20 times in the book of Proverbs alone, it talks about the value in wisdom in getting godly counsel. That is what's happening in these groups, right? And there's a verse in 1 Peter 5:8 that says that the devil prowls around as a roaring lion. In the last part of that verse, it says, seeking whom he can devour. And that verse is such a powerful word picture because a lot of people think that the lion, when on the hunt, will look at the herd and see which one is sick or weak. The lion cannot discern that. But what the lion on the hunt can discern is which one has been isolated from the herd or from the safety of the tribe, right? They can see the one that's off on their own. And that's how our spiritual adversary picks us off, is when we work in isolation. But when we come together, and that's what happens in these groups, when we come together like a herd, like a tribe, if you will, we've got one another's backs. We can help one another. We can look at one another's blind spots and those things. So that's really what's happening in these groups. And the cornerstone verse of Kingdom Factor is Psalm 78:72. And I think that as I've studied the word, this is one of the best leadership verses that I've ever found in Scripture. And we see three things happening in this verse. And this is the cornerstone of what we're about at Kingdom Factor. It says, David shepherded them with integrity of heart, and with skillful hands he led them. And there's three things happening in this verse, and these are big outcomes of the Kingdom Factor model. The first thing it talks about is David. David was an individual leader. Now, would you all agree with me that David was also a flawed leader? Yes. And as we study his life, he made some really bad decisions. Is there anybody else besides me that's a flawed leader on this conversation? Yeah. And if we don't think that we're flawed, then I would argue that we're deceived because we are all flawed. But yet, David is described as a man after God's own heart in 1 Samuel. So the first outcome that happens with the participants is that we would become men and women after God's own heart in leadership, in business, in our homes, in our churches, in our communities. That happens as a result of being in these groups. A second thing that this verse says is that he shepherded with integrity of heart. This means that David was concerned with doing the right things. He wanted to lead God's way. So the second outcome in our model is we learn and study and apply doing business and leadership God's way by really studying the principles and the way God would have us lead in our companies, in our communities, and so forth. The third thing that happens in this verse, that is an outcome of our participation in our groups, it says, with skillful hands he led them. This is about operational excellence. And this is what I was referring to earlier. When my business failed miserably, there were some operational things that I did not understand. I did not have operational excellence, which is why it crashed and burned the way it did. And so this is a holistic approach to leadership. It's about being a leader after God's own heart, doing business and leadership God's way, but doing it with excellence. Does that make sense, everybody? That's what we're about. Those are the outcomes. And so as I now start to dive into, this is the distinctive of the Kingdom Factor model and models like it is we're very holistic. It's not just growing our business, but it's growing personally. It's growing spiritually. It's developing ourselves in all those key areas. Who are we looking for? Who are the members? What's the criteria? Is we're looking for men and women who love Jesus, who are entrepreneurs, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, executives, but people who have in a position in their company or organization to make a real business impact. Does that make sense? So they can really take what they learn here and apply it and make a difference in the culture of their organizations. Okay. So C-suite leaders, so on and so forth. We have lots of nonprofit and ministry leaders that are involved and so forth. So that's the first criteria, real business impact. Second is we do have a statement of faith at Kingdom Factor, and it's very public. It's on our website. We just want everybody who's in our groups to sign off that they are in agreement with that and they understand that we're going to be talking about very overtly biblical Christian mindset and worldview in our groups. We're not going to hide behind it. We're not going to apologize for it. That's who we are. And so we like-minded people a part of the group. The third criteria is that they need to be able to control their schedules because we have monthly meetings and we just need them to be able to attend and be a good participant. So that's who we're looking for. So if you're on this conversation because you're going to be a referral partner for Angela, now you know who we're looking for. But if you're a business owner or leader and meet that criteria, this is possibly something for you to consider. Details now. I'm going to take the next 10 minutes. We'll be wrapped up. The Christian Business Advisory Group concept. Our meetings are once a month for 4 hours at a time. I've already talked about the group size is 6 to 12. The model, it's not perfect, I promise. We're constantly working to improve it, but it is proven. It's not an experiment. It's got longevity to it. Coaches may offer them in a face-to-face environment or virtual environments. And Angela, do you just speak to that? I think you mentioned it earlier, but would you just mind repeating, please, what you're kind of thinking as you begin to get this going?
Yeah, my goal is to have one of each because I just understand that sometimes virtual is easier, especially even in the city of Houston. We're so big that commuting is hard, and so my goal is to have one of each
Very awesome. Thank you. Yep.
to
And,
start. I mean, we can have more.
yeah, and ideally, I think we're looking early Q1 of 2026 is the kind of the timeline that we're shooting for here. It's going to be
Right.
based
Yeah.
on interest and the progress that we
Right.
make, but that just gives you an awesome framework. This is a place of safety and confidentiality and a common place to share with people who truly get it. As some of you identified with some of those pain points I was describing earlier in business, payroll and creditors and all those kinds of things. So when we get together with people who truly get it, it makes a difference. Now, this next bullet point is interesting to me and kind of fun actually to think about, talk about. It's a place to come and get neutral and unbiased input where there's no personal vested interest. And what I mean by that is, let me give you an example. My wife Beth and I have been married about 38 years. We've raised 3 kids, adult children now, out on their own. And in 38 years, we've had some amazing conversations. We've had some difficult conversations. By the way, we don't fight, we just have intense fellowship from time to time. But we've had difficult conversations. But what I cannot recall is ever having a neutral or unbiased conversation about anything in our marriage. Now, why is that? Well, because whatever it is we're talking about, we both have emotional vested interest in the topic. We may likely have financial vested interest in the topic, right? Even something like, well, where do you want to vacation next year? Well, we can have a great conversation, but we both have emotional vested interest in that. What happens in these groups is that when you're sitting around a table with these great leaders, people around the table can't fire one another, right? We don't work for one another. And so therefore we can be open and transparent and honest because there's not going to be a consequence to that. There's going to be a benefit to that. And so the Bible says to speak the truth in love to one another. And we're able to do that because, Marvin, I'm looking, I don't know you, but, if you and I are in a group together and I'm sharing something I'm going through and God put something on your heart to say, you don't need to worry about offending me because I can't fire you, right? That's kind of the idea is that we can be open and transparent and candid with one another. So that's what we mean by neutral and unbiased input. But to do so in love through Christian values and worldview. I had just yesterday in a group in one of my groups, because I still lead 4 groups. I had an individual who he has a family business and he has 3 of his own children and a son-in-law working in that business. And he was talking to the group about some of the dynamics. And somebody else in the group said to him, Tom, there is no way that you can lead this company as if your children weren't involved. It's impossible because y'all just had Thanksgiving dinner together, right? There's just dynamics, right? So there was just openness and candor. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about, is to have that kind of level of openness to, so that we're growing in all key areas. I'll take a couple of moments here and share with you specifically what the agenda items are in any given meeting. This is a screenshot from our member portal. So if you become a member, for all of our members, they get a member portal, and we track everything digitally online, what happens. The first component of the monthly meetings, we have prayer time. So each person would enter their prayer requests, their praises, and we pray for each other, we pray together, and we're actually able to track over a period of time how God answers our prayers month after month. That's really cool to be able to do that. And members get notified when prayers get answered, emails, and everything. It's really kind of a neat system. So we have prayer time together. The second component of our monthly meeting is what's called our content. And we have years and years of content. I'm going to show you a couple of examples in just a moment. But for about 45 minutes of every meeting, we bring together really solid content on leadership, on business development, spiritual growth. You'll see some examples in just a moment. But we have content presented and discussed in every meeting. Then we have something called a crucial conversation. And that's where in every meeting, one member is identified well in advance that they're going to present to the group the biggest issue they need to solve. Remember when I mentioned earlier on, I'll show you how we solve big issues. Well, a big way we do this is what we call a crucial conversation. And so, Dave, I'm just using this as an example. If you were in a group and it was your month, you would know well in advance so that you could be thinking strategically. There's a document that you would put together to present to the group where it would identify your issue that you want help with, what options you're considering, what Bible verses have you read and researched that influence the way you would think about this, and then the question that you want the group to help you solve. And so for like 45 or 50 minutes, all eyes are on that situation. And that's where, like I told you, that story of Kevin Mangin. By the way, I just noticed this for the first time. If you look at that picture, if you look on the right side, you see a guy kind of scratching his beard. That's Kevin. I just realized he's in the picture. It's the first time I've ever noticed that. So thank you, Jesus. So, in other words, we take and get after real solutions. Sometimes those solutions generate 5 and 6 figures worth of value. Hey, Mark Clevenger, I think I saw you on there. Mark's one of my partners here at Kingdom Factor. Mark was in one of my groups, still is in one of my groups, but for about 18 or 19 years when you had your business. Would you take maybe 2 minutes and share an example of what happened with your crucial conversation a few years ago and how that impacted things?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Mark Clevenger. I'm actually here to support Angela. I know the job she's doing. I know the ministry that she's bringing in. So I thought I would bop on here. You know what? I was a business owner for well over 20 years. And I remember, gosh, like it was yesterday, coming to something similar to this, except it was a little different 20 years ago. We got a free breakfast and we all sat around a table, right, and did this. Now we do it on a Zoom, which at that point, nobody even knew what Zoom was, right? We're still doing landlines or what have you. Anyways, I decided to join the group. I'll be honest, I was a little intimidated. I wasn't sure if I'd be the right fit or I knew enough. The good news is after the first meeting, I did realize everybody was just as broken as I was, and so that kind of gave me relief. And so I jumped into the group. I did it for many, many years, and in 2007, 8, it was my time to do what Ray, I think you're referring to the crucial conversation. And if I don't know if you guys remember at that time, but those were bad times. I was in the high volume outsourced recruitment industry. So we hired for like the Alcoas, the Siemens, like 500 to 600 people a year. And man, nobody was hiring. And it was bad times. And sure enough, it's my time to do the crucial conversation. I remember going to my coach and saying, hey, I don't really want to do this. I'm getting ready to go out of business. I'm going to have to lay off. I didn't know how to do it. My payroll was well over 70,000 a month. And it was just like, this is a bad deal. And he encouraged me to do it. But any good business owner, I said, no, I don't want to do it. And so obviously after having those conversations, he finally said to me, hey, what's one thing this group could offer you that would keep you in business? So I very flippantly said, I need a whole different revenue line. I need a whole different revenue line that could keep it going. He said, well, present it to the group. What do you got to lose? You know, it looks like you probably might be going out of business anyway. So sure enough, I presented it to the group, kind of laid it out, like Ray said, in the detailed template, got to the meeting, and I was just honest and transparent, saying, you know, I'm in a bad place. I'm in a wrong industry, wrong time. You guys all know me in the room. We've been doing life together. Things aren't good. So they start going around and giving me answers of, hey, have you tried this, this? Of course, you know how it is as someone who's been in business. I've done that, been there. No, 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 no. Finally, I had one guy that said, "Hey, we could do this all day. We know you well. Let's start talking about what we can do instead of all the things we can't do." So we asked a few more questions. A couple things went around, and this is a true story. I had a guy from a totally different industry, not even in my industry, that said to me, "Hey, I think that you're not looking at this right. You don't have a revenue problem. What you have is a customer problem." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You don't have a revenue problem. What you guys do is great. Problem is you don't have any customers that need you. So why don't we start focusing on customers that do need what you do?" And in today's market in 2007 and 8, it's entrepreneur companies who need one or two key hires to help them get through this, not hiring 500 people. So why don't we take your model and start focusing on those who need your service? And that kind of put a light bulb off, and I went kind of ding ding, started connecting the dots. We had some other questions. Just for the sake of time, I kid you not, from that one idea in that one meeting, it created a monthly revenue of $70,000 a month, year after year, on that side, and completely saved my business. Now, don't get me wrong, I had to right size, lay some people off, right? I had to do some things that wasn't fun, but it did save my business. Matter of fact, about 5 years ago, a little fun fact is I actually sold the business. The reason they bought it is because I had two revenue services. I had an outsourced revenue stream, and then I had the other one for the one-off. And so I sold it and actually joined Kingdom Factor with Ray. By the way, a little other side note, Ray was my coach I was talking about who made me do it at that time. And so it actually generated that revenue from that one good idea on that. And so that's kind of my real story that helped save my business. I will say that Ray, it sounded like he shared the Kevin Mangin story. To me, that story resonates with me because that's what Kingdom business is all about, being able to give back, make a difference in the world. But that's the impact the group made to me. So I don't know if that's what you were looking for, Ray, but that's kind of the story I was thinking. So
Yeah, well, it's the real story. So thank you, Mark, and appreciate that. I remember all those conversations, and I'm glad you listened to that great coach you had. Said, let's put it in front of the group. I'm teasing. So we've talked about we have prayer time together, we have content discussion, we have the crucial conversation. Those are the first three elements. Then the other two things that happen in the monthly meeting is we do what we call godly counsel. And that's where everybody else in the group who wasn't that crucial conversation presenter gets a chance to identify something that they'd like some input on, a personal issue, family, marriage, parenting, what have you, a business issue, whatever. Everybody identifies an issue, and then we, as a group, vote and talk about two top issues. So every single month, we are having practical input and discussion. As I said, it's an advisory council. So that happens in every meeting. And then the last component is what we call imperatives, where every month, and we track this in our system, every month we have each member identify the one thing that's most important for them to accomplish between this meeting and the next. It could be a personal goal, it could be a spiritual goal, it could be a business goal. Things like, I'm going to get in the gym 3 times a week for the next month. I'm going to have that difficult conversation with my key leader in the company, or I'm going to complete that website, or I'm going to get away for a weekend with my spouse or with one of my children, whatever it is. That every member identifies one thing that they're committing to doing, and it's a simple yes, no, I did it or I didn't do it. They come back and we give a count on that. And then David in Psalm says, I will not offer the Lord that which costs me nothing. And so we put actual accountability to it. Each coach and group decides how they want to do it. But in my group, if you come back and didn't get done what you said you were going to do, you have to write a $250 check to a ministry that the group decides where that money goes. And so there's accountability. So the idea here is that at the end of a year, each person can look back and say, this group helped me to identify and helped hold me accountable to 12 really big things in my life and business. That's the idea. Huge value to that. Okay, so those are the 5 components. I mentioned that I would just talk about content for just a second. These are just a few samples of book covers from our content sessions, ranging from things like the 4 disciplines of execution, to hiring and finding top talent, retention of talent, overcoming business fraud, um, marketing collateral reviews. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but we focus all of our content in those three areas that were described in Psalm 78, 72. So anytime we develop a piece of content or leverage, we know exactly what category it's fitting and why. So over time, this builds, right? This builds a great, very holistic experience from a content standpoint and a development standpoint. Now, the one thing I'll cover, and I've got about 3 minutes, we'll be done. A lot of times when people learn about this, they're intrigued by it, makes sense. They say, yeah, I can see where that would bring value, but Ray, Angela, I'm just too busy. Okay, we're all busy. Every single one of our hundreds of members across the country are just like you. They're busy, but they would not continue. Mark, and you've been in a group now, even though you're a partner, you're still in a group, right? As a business owner, we're partners in this. Mark would not have been a member in that group for 19, 20 years unless it was what? Bringing value. In the 4 groups that I have, my average tenure is over 8 years. Okay, so these are busy business people. They're not coming just because they like Ray. They're coming because the group and the model's bringing great transformational value month after month, year after year. You see, the best leaders get this, is that you have to sharpen the saw on a regular basis. You just can't keep hacking and chopping. You've got to sharpen the saw. And we see Jesus model this, don't we, in scripture? He's continuously stopping all the ministry work to get away to be with the Father. He needed to sharpen the saw. He needed to retune himself spiritually and get back in touch with the Father. So we all need that. We need to work on our business, not always just be working in our business. When we look at the actual time commitment, it's 48 hours a year. That's 2 days. Most business people go away for conferences, workshops, training, seminars at least once or twice, 3 times a year for a couple of days at a time. And we all have done this where we go away to this big conference, this big association event or whatever, and we get all this information and we get information overload. And we don't actually do much with it. Does that make sense, right? We mean well, but we don't actually do much with it. So rather than doing this as a 2-day conference, we break it down and we say, we're going to meet 4 hours a month. We're going to learn, discuss, apply, come back and be held accountable. Learn, discuss, apply, come back and be held accountable. So it's really 2 days out of the year. We just break it down. I hope that makes sense. I hope that makes a lot of sense. Our promise to every member, our commitment to every member who joins, we call this our 5C promise. First thing is you'll have a called and qualified coach. And that in this case is Angela. Not only with her background, but she is in the middle of extensive training with us, and there's a real investment of her time, talent, and treasure. She's serious about this. She's going to be a great coach for her members. You'll experience collaboration and community as a business leader, as a marketplace leader. You'll have a group, you'll have community to help you navigate all these things, place to bounce ideas around, place to get new ideas, solutions. You'll get great content that has been proven over time to bring great value. And then we're going to challenge. We're going to challenge because we're going to hold you accountable to the things that you say are important to you. So that's our 5C promise. Okay. As I said on the front end, the only commitment we're going to ask you for today is there's a QR code on your screen. If you would be so kind and maybe just take your phone, snap that QR code, take 30, 45 seconds, give us a little bit of feedback. Was this helpful? Was this informative? And one of the questions is, would you be interested in a follow-up conversation where we'll dot the I's and cross the T's? I'm sure you've got a lot of questions, but we would like to do that on a one-on-one basis if you're interested. So if you would just take a snap of that QR code and give us some feedback, that would be awesome. Angela, I'm going to leave this up here for about 30 seconds so that everybody can do that. But is there anything, Angela, that you would want to share as we wind down here today? Thank you all so
Well,
much for your time, by the way.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you for being invested in me and in my journey, but also in your own. I know a lot about a lot of the stories on this call, and collecting stories, as you guys know, is one of my favorite things. And so I'd love for us to continue to grow your story together. But also, if you know other people that you're like, oh my goodness, these are people I know would benefit from chatting with you about potentially being part of an advisory group, would you please never hesitate to let me know? If nothing else, I'm going to get to learn their story, and y'all know that's my favorite thing in the world. And so, um, please feel free to share this concept with anybody you think would be interested in it. So
Well, we're wrapped up, gang. Thank you so very much for the
thanks,
investment of your
guys.
time today. I'll leave this up for about 10 more seconds and we'll see you soon. We'd love to hear
And I
from you.
will
Thanks.
send out the briefing to the executive summary to you guys shortly in email. Thanks,
Thank,
guys. Thanks,
thank,
Ray.
thank you, everybody. God bless. Bye-bye.